So in this third and final part to this lecture on radiations, we're going to actually investigate an example. We've got a couple in the last part two, but we're now going to get into a lot of detail to show how a lot of these different mechanisms that we've been talking about can really ramp up the speciation process. So we are now in the Caribbean. We have our map here. We're going to focus in particular on the 4 islands of the Greater Antilles that are actually labelled here: Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico and Jamaica. Now we'll put this image up on the screen here. We've got 4 different types on the top and 4 different types on the bottom. Now this is kind of like, you know, it's a situation where you need to make a decision about what are the similarities and what are the differences. Now you can quickly see that at least on the bottom row, all those 4 lizards are all pretty green. They're all hanging out in the same area of the environment, whereas the ones on the top, they're all hanging out in different areas in the environment on these sticks, but again, they're all pretty consistent. They're also pretty consistent in their general morphology, particularly their coloration. So they look very similar on the top and the bottom row. The question is, are they different species? I won't let you worry too much about that, other than to say that they are. What we have here is a series of species that are found on each of these 4 islands of the Greater Antilles. And a really interesting thing here is, if we just take Puerto Rico for example, we have one species which we'll call our twig lizard, and we have another one which is our green lizard. And if we go over to Jamaica, we find again that Jamaican community has also a twig lizard and also has this green lizard, although in this particular case it's hanging out on a branch just to fool us. Okay, so the point is here is that we've got very similar types of morphology of lizards hanging out in very similar environments on all 4 of these islands. There is actually more than just 2 types. We term these ecomorphs. These are different morphologies of these lizards, and they are contingent on where they're hanging out in their environment, and that's where the ecology aspect of the echo comes in. On the Greater Antilles, those 4 islands, there's actually as many as 6 different ecomorphs, ranging between 5 and 6, from very large crown giants to very small skeletal looking lizards, which are these twigs. Now these are anoles. You may have heard of these before, but they're a classic model system in evolutionary ecology. Now the question is that each of these islands has the same set of 4 to 5 of these different species, but same ecomorphs. So the question is how did they originate on all these different islands? Now you could say that perhaps an ancestor of the crown giant independently invaded each of these 4 islands, and subsequently that's why we've got crown giants on each of the 4. And so if we actually create a phylogenetic using very old school methods and going purely on morphology, we find that yes, all these ecomorphs group together because of their similarity in terms of their morphology. There's also similarities in their behavior as well. And these similarities correlate to where they hang out in the environment. But if we look at the genetics of these species, we find that each one of these species has effectively independently evolved on each of these 4 islands. So the crown giant has come from a very generic ancestor and diversified and adapted to that particular crown canopy and become a specific crown giant. So it's independent evolution of all of these 5 to 6 different ecomorphs. And we term this convergent evolution. Now this is the repeated evolution of similar forms, say here ecomorphs, in phylogenetically independent lineages. The reason why evolutionary ecologists get really excited about this is because it shows the same adaptation evolving again and again and again. It provides wonderful replication for us to be able to investigate the mechanisms of adaptation. So, convergent evolution, it's one of these factors of evolutionary ecology that's really important. So, How did this occur on the Greater Antilles? We'll just focus in on Puerto Rico. So the idea is that we have a very generic, generalist ancestor invading Puerto Rico, and then through what we think is a process of character displacement, so competition for resources, in this particular case, space, hanging out on this particular tree in this forest, they've partitioned up that tree, and subsequently, because of that partitioning, have adapted to their unique microhabitats, their ecological niches, and they've formed these separate ecomorphs as a consequence. So it's a process of invading a new heterogeneous environment, in addition to being kick-started through character displacement and then subsequent diversification, adaptive radiation on each of these 4 islands independently through a relatively consistent sequence. First of all, the twig, then the crown giant, trunk crown, grass bush, and then finally the trunk ground ecomorphs. So there's an additional component here. The ability to be able to navigate that 3-dimensional environment has resulted through the evolution of a key innovation. I mentioned geckos in the last part of this lecture. Anolas, the other group, have also independently evolved these toe pads that's allowed them to diversify into this 3-dimensional environment in a very effective means.